Awesome. Yay. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We are Impact Psychology, a collective of contextual behavioral-oriented therapists in Colorado. And one of our main missions is to build community locally and nationally and to increase inclusivity for all members of ACBS and folks passionate about ACT and contextual behavioral science. So welcome.
Yeah, we're happy you're here. We wanted to just quickly announce that today's call, one of the things we've started is a monthly free peer consultation call, and this is part of that series we meet the first Tuesday of each month over Zoom. Usually we start a half hour earlier at 8:30 Colorado time. We're accommodating Steve's school drop-off schedule.
Yeah.
But we are usually at 8:30 Mountain Time, half an hour earlier, and we welcome everyone, all levels of ACT training, who's interested in contextual behavioral-oriented practice. We talk about ACT cases. We keep them de-identified, of course. If you have a question or just want some people to talk to. It's led by Dr. Colleen Ernstrom, who's part of our Impact Psych group, but couldn't make it today. And all of us usually try to join. So please feel free to join us for future meetings. It's the exact same Zoom link, and you can find it on our webpage. So everyone is welcome, impactpsychcolorado.com.
Colleen's here.
Ah!
Yay.
Yay, she made it after all.
All right. So we are so pleased to have Dr. Stephen Hayes joining us today for a live Q&A about A Liberated Mind. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you for doing this. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So Dr. Stephen Hayes is a co-creator of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy and a professor of psychology at the University of Nevada, Reno. He is an author of 44 books and nearly 600 scientific articles and is ranked among the top most cited psychologists in the world. Our hope is that today the Q&A will bring together a diverse group of clinicians and researchers from around the world to share ideas and ask Steve some questions about his groundbreaking new book, A Liberated Mind, How to Pivot Toward What Matters. So I think many people share the sentiment that A Liberated Mind is a true gift to the contextual behavioral science community, as well as to the global community. And I think I speak for many of us when I say that I had some mind-blowing moments reading this book. And I was really in awe of the clear and illuminating explanations of new and old concepts alike. Since A Liberated Mind has been published, I don't know about you all, and I'd love to hear from folks, but I've definitely had significantly more clients who have read and heard of the book, heard of ACT, and are calling specifically for ACT. So would love to hear from you in the chat if this has also been your experience. So ACT is really becoming a part of our cultural conversation, and I like to think of it like it's really in the water now, and it's just so exciting. So I want to offer, on behalf of all of us at Impact, I want to offer a heartfelt thank you to Steve for his blood, sweat, and tears in writing this book, and for being here today.
Yeah.
So before we get started, Steve did not put me up to this, but I do want to say that I just want to encourage folks to, if you enjoyed the book or if you have something to say about the book, just to add a review on Amazon, because this really helps the book spread far and wide and really in the end can help people have more access to these tools that can be transformative. So we're thrilled to have you, Steve, and so thank you for being here.
It's glad to be. I'm really, really glad to be here. And it's the first discussion that I've been part of with regard to the book. The book has been out for, I think now 16 weeks. It could be 18 weeks, one or the other. And it's still working to find an audience that's landed well and done well, but. And it's beginning to, I think, open up a cultural conversation, which is part of the purpose. but it's still in the early days. We'll see. There's been no real major media yet. There's a couple ones that's coming. There's a Wall Street Journal thing coming, and there's a large radio show, etc. So we'll see where it goes. But regardless, it'll do some good, I hope, in terms of putting the many now self-help books out there and the more therapist-oriented books into a wraparound that allows people to appreciate the arc of the work and its relevance to all these areas in our lives in a way that is not too focused just on technique or school or label, but really more focused on the underlying processes that liberate people, or if you mismanage them, that create human suffering and restriction of human lives. So it's exciting to me to be part of this conversation because it's the first one that I've actually done.
That's so cool. We feel so cutting edge to be in first to have you do a Q&A with
discussion group or whatever we call it. That's the first one. So your questions are really of importance to me. I mean, I've done many podcasts and all that, but it's one host at a time, and often they've not really read it, and they're asking very standard questions. What is ACT, etc. And that's all fine. But this is a little different, where I'm talking to folks who maybe have had a little bit of time to look at the book, and we can push it out a little bit about what does this all mean and how it might be of use.
Well, what we're hoping, Steve, because one of our missions is to bring diverse, inclusive voices, is that everybody who's on this call will feel empowered to jump in. And we actually have some questions ourselves we wanted to ask, and then we have a write-in question from New Zealand for someone who couldn't make it. But we are going to encourage everyone who's on the call, if you have a question and it feels even like a bold move to do it, this is a bold move for us to host this. So please jump in. The way it's going to work is that we're going to, you can unmute yourself. We were thinking there's 29 people on, so that's not such a huge number that people can't just unmute themselves and jump in, but you might want to throw a question on the chat. Let us know, and then we'll make a turn for you to say, oh, I have a question, or you could even type the question in directly. So we'll see how that goes. But we want to hear from everyone. So please dive in. We also just want to note, I think it's clear, but we want to make it really clear that we are recording this. We're going to post it on our webpage and might be posted, I don't know where. So just be aware of that. We want everyone's consent to be recorded if you're going to ask a question. So I think Meg's going to start with a few questions, but I also just wanted to say, Steve, I'm so appreciative, like Meg, of your book. There were times when I had to put it down because I was like, this is so good. I can't handle it right now. I had a client who couldn't afford therapy anymore. And I said, just go read A Liberated Mind. That's basically therapy in a book. So I think it's a really wonderful thing that you're offering the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I could say just a few things about why I wrote it, and then we can get into the questions and stuff. That's and kind of what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
I don't assume that everybody on the call has read A Liberated Mind. Probably many of you have, and what has brought you here. But it took me 11 years, I say, to write it. The real truth is it was about 5 or 6 years of actual work. There's 400 and whatever pages in there, 430 or something. There's at least 1,000 pages on the floor. And what I proposed it 11 years ago, that was just a little bit after Get Out of Your Mind Into Your Life hit. And, that was a kind of an amazing, lucky experience. John Cloud coming across it, writing it up in Time magazine, and having it go up to number 20 on the Amazon list and beating Harry Potter for one glorious week. So that was my 15 minutes of fame. And it was all fine and good, but it was cast as kind of, in the story John wrote, John's dead now, he was actually very much involved in A Liberated Mind, and I'd hoped that he had been a co-author, but it wasn't to be. But in the way that he wrote it as a war between the traditional CBT people and the CBS ACT people. And they had a picture of me on my motorcycle with red eye that they didn't paint out, you know, like Time magazine doesn't know how to paint out red eye, really. And a picture of Tim in his bow tie under the words, "the establishment." And John went down and tortured poor Tim until he said something stupid, and then they put it in the story. I think he said something like, "The last time I heard about the third wave, it was past life regression." Well, that's not Tim, and I'm not in a war with Tim, and I'm not in a war with CBT. It's just silly. It never was true. But it sold magazines, and it made people want to kill me. The label for me, by the way, on my motorcycle was the Rebel. So it was fun. I kind of enjoyed it, but I paid dearly. And I wanted to write a book that really was more progressive, that sort of said, no, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and the whole evidence-based treatment, not just the CBT wing, but there's an evidence-based wing to humanistic, existential, analytic, etc., has been trying to move forward. And what we're trying to do is to do the deeper dive into the underlying processes that are involved in not just the psychological, but the sort of biopsychosocial set of things that lead people either into cul-de-sacs or empower them in their lives. And then be able to read that and focus on that and be able to change that. Had I written it 11 years ago, it would have been a pretty limited story because we were sitting on a very small number of studies. I know in the ACT side, when Get Out of Your Mind Into Your Life was written, I think there was something like 9 randomized trials. There's now pushing 350. But in terms of the studies on psychological flexibility, or even having psychological flexibility as a term for the overall concept, et cetera, all those things were in the future. But over the last several years then, when I really got serious again, I said, it's time to do it. What I did was, I worked on platform building. There's a reason why TEDx talks and all that stuff. And it's because it's a now or never time for me, because I'm turning 72 years old and there's this rumor going around that people don't live forever. So I figured, if I'm going to put this life journey out there, I want to tell the personal story, but I really want to tell the science story. But I also want to write a think book, but I have it land in a way that is really useful. So it can be kind of a self-help book, but in a way that empowers people to try these things and see. And if they do, then they can take advantage of what then was or now is hundreds of resources out there, many for free, but also relatively inexpensive books and so forth that we've looked at and seen in randomized trials do actually change human lives. And many clinicians and practitioners in the mental health area, yes, but also in the behavioral health area, and increasingly also in the areas of social processes and things like sport and performance and leadership and things of that kind, prejudice, stigma, diversity, etc. So the hope was, and what I was trying to do, was to write an accessible book. I had to work really hard to wash the geek off of me. I worked for years with a development editor, a really wonderful person named Emily Luce, who worked with Lynn Ostrom on her popular book on the core design principles before she won the Nobel. And Lynn has been important to me with the pro-social project that David Sloan Wilson and I and Paul Atkins have kind of launched, which is written about in the final chapter of A Liberated Mind, or one of the last chapters. And she just would not allow me to put geek out the door. She just wouldn't. She'd just hammer me and hammer me and hammer me. That's why there's 1,000 pages on the floor, because you can see what I'm weaving together when you read the book is this enough of me that you have a reason to care. I really was kind of using me as a hook on the wall. I wanted to tell my personal story, but the real reason for it is to make it a human story enough that normal readers would care. So it starts out with some of my struggles, and it's woven in, and some of my family issues and things of that kind. But then the science story, all these wonderful people around the world who work together. I'm really kind of sad that as many things are on the floor about the leaders and clinicians and researchers and philosophers and so forth in the CBS community. A lot of them were cut and limited, but and a few were anonymized when people really got down to the end, when they're we were writing about things that had to be protected. But for good or for ill, that's it. The way I say it is, it's the first ACT book that you can give to a friend without feeling as though you're telling them they either should be in therapy or be a therapist. You know, it has that kind of quality. And in fact, unlike lots of the self-help books that fall off during the holidays, A Liberated Mind actually increased during the holidays. And I think it's because people were gifting it, probably to people in their family and so forth, not having to feel as though, boy, you're really screwed up or something. You should read Get Out of Your Mind into Your Life. That's a hard thing to give to a friend unless they really have asked for help. But A Liberated Mind is not. So I hope it empowers the community. I'm sorry for holding on so much, but I hope it really empowers the community to focus on what's of importance, which I think are these liberation processes. And let's work with our colleagues who are not necessarily CBS types or even CBT types, and find a way to kind of come together in community and focus on what's important.
Awesome. Wonderful. So it's great to hear a little bit about the blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, because there were a lot, it sounds like. So I think I just wanted to dive in and ask a couple questions while we wait for everybody to sort of gather their questions and dive in. The part in the book that really spoke to me, and I think it spoke to a lot of people based on the listserv, is about yearnings.
Yeah.
And I'm just really excited. There's actually a section of the book that, in particular, the section on belonging,
right,
that really took my breath away. It was, I read it multiple times. It's actually like a really short piece. And I kept having the thought, like, you could do an entire day workshop, you know, I mean, you could multi-day workshop. And so I'm really interested in hearing more. I guess one of my first questions was about belongings. What about belonging as a yearning? Was, do you end up in belonging a lot of the time? Because I thought the other yearnings were really interesting, and I really liked the other yearnings, but I was like, bam, belonging. That's where I feel like I do a lot, or the bulk of my work with clients. So I just wanted to hear your perspective about that.
Yeah, if you had to pick one that's a central kind of human yearning, it would be that. And it really kind of comes, some of my sensitivity to it comes, out of what we're going on in the mental health side of things, and attachment, and Sue Johnson, and all kinds of wonderful things having to do with that in our field. But my sensitivity to it also came out of recognizing that multi-level selection is really based on the centrality of belonging in human development and human evolution. And I wrote an article on RFT, and where did human language came from, and the title of the article says it all: cooperation came first. And there's the three big C's that are characteristic of human beings, cooperation, culture, and cognition. And every serious approach to psychology recognizes those at some point in there, at least modern ones, and then tries to tell a story as to which came first. Very often cognition is nominated first. The brain size developed, and then we started talking, and then because of that, we were able to sort of make deals and cooperate and stuff. But it doesn't make any good evolutionary sense. I mean, how come the brain started expanding? And why would it expand in these particular ways to support cognition? Well, it's because of the kind of monkey we are. We're so social that we're able to take the perspective of others, and that speaker and listener interchange that's involved just in the bidirectionality of a word, having meaning for both the speaker and the listener. The same parts of the brain light up. We're the only species for whom that's true, comes out of that. And So my work with David Sloan Wilson, I really trained with him almost my last sabbatical. I had a sabbatical that finished last year, 7.5 years earlier. I basically became a student at David Sloan Wilson, and just was insistent that I was going to understand evolution, multi-development, multi-level, whether multi-dimensional, multi-level, extended evolutionary synthesis enough to write about it in a way that's halfway credible. I mean, I'm not a biologist, and let's be honest, there's a lot about evolution that even careful readers know that I don't, because I've got a lot of work to do, but I've done enough. And the message of that is that, you know, our driving force for our evolution has been small groups and bands. And it's where I believe cognition of the sort we're doing right now came from. Well, at some point in there, then I realized that consciousness itself viewed the way we view it. I wrote an article recently that better not let all these answers go this long, or we won't get many questions in. But on this view of life, the online magazine that David has for the Evolution Institute, I wrote an article on making evolution conscious. And consciousness, I think, is the story of evolution. That if you define it to mean the ability to interact to the internal and external world and the regularities within and between them, which is my definition of consciousness. But when we hit human language, it massively accelerated that. It also established, I think, a kind of transcendent sense of self. Because the I, here, nowness of awareness that's involved in perspective taking, which is central to being able to function as a group, gave us kind of a dimensionless strand on which to put the beads of our own experience. And so what you see in A Liberated Mind, and I kind of treated it was more like a discovery. In the process of writing the book, I didn't put Yearnings in the original draft, in the original outline. But as I'm writing the book and I'm doing these other work, it's like, you know, really, there's a reason underneath each of these inflexibility processes. There's something we're trying to accomplish. And once that little sweater kind of dangling thread of belonging showed up, which is dominant in the multi-level selection, group focus, and seeing that consciousness itself contained that, and then cognition as an extension of that, it kind of went boom, boom, boom. And I remember the day when I sort of realized, holy beans, I've recreated three of the 6 yearnings come right out of self-determination theory. And they've got belonging, and they have competence, and they have what they call autonomy. But if you unpack it, it's really the ability to say what's of importance to you. Well, self-determination theory is like the anti-behavioral theory if you're a behavior analyst. I mean, they're the ones who are busting the behavior analysts so hard on using external reinforcers and not really. So it was a shock to my system, and actually kind of a pleasant one of maybe then this could be a way of bringing together a number of different ideas. So I'm sorry for talking so big and theoretical about it, but let me just come down and land in this way. In the same sense that I think you can say that of all the psychological processes involved in ACT and the ACT work, the most important one is the witnessing self, observing self, because that's the pivot point from all of them. It's the one that allows us to stand with the hell of our own history, to watch our minds, to open up to our feelings, to have the whole of us be involved in making values choices and not just our analytic, judgmental repertoire. And there's a new piece I just put out with a Chinese colleague who actually sort of elevates it to being above all of them, like the one ring that rules them all. And I think human consciousness is itself a reflection of the yearning for belonging that's there inside this sweet and sad group of social primates called human beings. And that connects us up to spiritual wisdom traditions, to mindfulness consciousness. This work in a very different way. So,
yeah. Beautiful.
Yes. A short version of that answer is yes.
And just to piggyback on that, one of the ways in which it seems like it sort of dovetails with the spiritual tradition is how you might evoke that in session.
Yeah.
Like that there's sort of a spiritual tradition that might do something like, what is it that you really want? And then sort of do like a evocative set of questions where you just sort of go down, like downward arrow, and what would that get you? And what is it that you really want? And what would that get you? So that's kind of what comes to my mind. But I'm wondering, like, if I walked into the room and I was your client, like, how would you get at this? Like, what kind of questions?
One of the things I would suggest trying, and I've been surprised to see how much it works to do it, is that if a client is coming in with lots of complaints about others and a lot of resentments and past wounds and tragedies and traumas and conflict and often very mindy, very judgmental of yourself and others. Life's only going to be okay when, and then the when is the things that others need to do so that you can trust them, so that you can really relate to them, so that they can understand you. I mean, all that kind of normal stuff that is just thick and lifeless and central. You can't walk away from it because it's so central. It's right there in the first words out of the client's mouth very often. I mean, even if they're talking just about their anxiety, depression, etc., the next sentence is, and because of that, and then there's something social in there. There's something about other people in there. Well, what I've sort of seen in that is, because of A Liberated Mind and where it took me in terms of yearnings, is a little ding, 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 ding. What's really important here is belonging. But what's really important in that from an ACT perspective is letting go of the conceptualized self and the conceptualized other, having enough diffusion skills to do that, having enough acceptance skills to open up to things that'll start to happen when you do that, some painful things and so forth. But then the more, the next step of being able to notice your experience in the moment, these kind of self as process things, and then this self as context piece of finding a place in which you're more than your story, you're more than your history, you're more than your struggles, and connecting in consciousness with that same quality in others, where you find that you belong by a birthright. You don't belong because you've earned it. You don't belong because you're special. You don't belong because you're especially needy or especially able. You belong because you were brought into consciousness as part of this social troop and connecting in consciousness. So like slowing the session down, really going almost literally eye to eye with your client, opening up their heart to that yearning for connection that is there in experience right here, right now, in actuality between people. But not just that, the repertoire that affords that allows that is the interconnection that is built into human consciousness itself. And if you look at children who don't have that sense, like kids on the spectrum, and we use that word autism, selfism. No, it's not really selfism. It's a different sense of self. The sense of self we're talking about is inherently interconnected. I mean, if there was an apocalypse and you're the last person alive, that little seed of consciousness will connect you to others, because you were drawn into consciousness by the social caring of others, by adults who looked you in the eye and said, "You sweet baby," and who talked to you and allowed you to put together the I here nowness of awareness that allows you, even if you're the last person alive on the planet, to be able to notice your experience. That's a social process. And, we belong by birthright. So I'm talking a little more theoretically, but practically, here's the thing I would leave with. Don't get into try some sessions where you don't get into the content so much. When you're hearing this, that you go into the present connection between you and your client, and to asking these out of left field questions about when you felt of your clients, when they felt especially connected with others, especially alive, especially supported, especially loved or loving. And even though it doesn't seem to be related to the content, it'll open up a conversation that will address that mindy chatter about social pain and social problems and inclusion and so forth in a way that cuts through the undergrowth. So the value of the yearnings is that when we go there and speak to them, we can do unusual things that are immediately felt as satisfying because they're focused on what we really want. And we don't really want to be right about how, wrong our husband is. We really don't. It's just what the mind says you have to do to make it safe. And it's not true. So I find in that work that's more like the emotional deepening kind of relationship-oriented work, that's in things like mentalization or attachment and all of that. And so I if I were to predict what will happen with the A Liberated Mind kind of thing in terms of the CBS community, is that some of these same people who we're inviting the ACBS to talk to us, we're going to start stealing some of their methods and using them.
Cool. Great. Well, yeah, thank you for that. That's really illuminating. Should we open up to some other questions, Debbie?
Well, let's, yeah. So I have a couple, but I actually really want to see first if anybody, let me open it up. I have one and then one from New Zealand, but I'd rather, just for the sake of, our value of being really inclusive and allowing this space here. So you can either chat, I think we have a small enough group that people can just unmute themselves and jump in. So does anybody want to ask Steve a question? You have Steve Hayes right here. And if not, I'll go for it, but let me pause for a moment. If you're feeling bold or not, even if you're not feeling bold move. Okay, well, let me ask two. First, I'll ask one that I came up with myself, Steve. It's more about your personal process with the book. Can you hear me? I think my mic.
You're going in and out, but I can still hear you.
Okay, so you do share a lot of your personal stories, which I think makes the book really wonderful and rich. And you've certainly shared prior to A Liberated Mind, on your TED Talk and some other venues.
Sure.
What's it like for you to put yourself out in the public sphere like that? And how do you grapple with decisions about what to share and what not to?
Well, I was willing to share almost anything, if it's of use. I didn't want to write a self-focused book, but and that's just been my MO. If you come to a workshop with me, you see, what you see is what you get. And, if you were to talk to my wife, she'd tell you, this guy is not the most psychologically flexible person in the world. I say, yeah, that's right. I came by this interest honestly. And she'll say, but what you see is what you get. I'm not trying to be a thing. I'm just trying to be me. So I wanted to use my story to help, as I said earlier, create a context in which these issues could turn from the abstract and the theoretical to the specific and concrete. And I was telling client stories and stories about the leaders of the CBS community and so forth, but I wanted to, not do that unless I was willing to do it myself. I found it extremely challenging. What was challenging about it was I didn't want to just kind of rattle off things that I'd talked about before. I wanted to actually do a deeper exploration. So I'll give you an example. I called every girlfriend I could remember and find, and my two ex-wives, and had long conversations with them, which I recorded and transcribed. about what it was like to be in a relationship with me. And it was, there was a lot of painful things in there. I mean, there was a lot of painful things to hear. There were painful things to ask about. I didn't want to tell any stories that I couldn't confirm. I'm going to have a hard time talking about this one without crying, because it still moves me to tears for reasons that I don't fully understand. But you saw in my first TEDx talk, if you saw it, my kind of night on the carpet, you know, where I hit bottom inside my own panic disorder, where I think I'm having a heart attack, and then I realized another freaking form of a panic attack. Well, I didn't want to tell that story in the book unless I knew when it happened and where it happened. And I had a really clear memory of the shag carpet and where the furniture was, where the phone was, where the doors were. A really clear, but I did not know what that was. I mean, I knew I was in a place, and I knew it was just like this, but I couldn't remember what that place was. Why was I there? And so I spent months trying to find it. And it was the apartment of an ex-girlfriend of mine. And by getting it close in time enough and talking to people, I finally asked the right questions, and I actually sent the diagram of the rooms, and she said, yeah, that's my apartment. And I wrote a note and an email to John Cloud, who was working with me on the book at the time. And I said, I found it. And I just spent like an hour crying. And I'm not exactly sure why, but it's something like this. And this is 35 years ago now. And I remember what it was like to be me at the time. And it is otherworldly. It's like another person almost. And I think I tell the story in the book, but maybe not, but let me jump over. I remember being on a plane and having the stewardess talk about putting on your seat belts. And to me, it was like watching an Olympic athlete. How did she do that? She got in front of a whole plane and said, you know, here's how to put on your seatbelt. I don't know, if anybody's ever had panic disorder or depression to the point where you can't function, or an addiction to the point where you're practically losing your life inside your addiction, maybe they can relate to why this brings tears to my eyes, is that there's a place where you can get so wrapped around these problems that just being human seems beyond imagination. And to go back there on purpose and to find those moments and then to write about them and speak about them, and to do it with integrity, where it's not a show, you know, I found just excruciating. Well, I did the TED talk in part to get enough buzz around ACT that I could go to one of the big 5 publishers and say, there's real interest here. You know, people will want to read this book. And part of writing blogs and all the things that I've done over the last several years has been out of that. And before that first TED talk, I got in front of my wife. It was about 3 minutes before going on to backstage, and then about 10 minutes away from being pulled on stage. And I looked her in the eye and said, I can't do this. I cannot do this. I cannot. And what I couldn't do was the scream, because that scream happened once when I was in a machine and almost killed, and then at the bottom of my panic disorder, and then I was going to do it publicly and I didn't practice it. I didn't want to hear it come out of my mouth, you know. And if you hear it, it's a weird sound. I mean, it's kind of shocking. And, you know, my wife is a wonderful, loving person, got in front of me and said, just be yourself. And just be yourself. And I went back and did it. And I won't ever do that scream again. I'm not doing it again. And I hope I don't have to call my girlfriends again and find where all these things happen again and remember what it was like to be so far out of the normal stream that even to be able to talk in front of a plane full of people was beyond comprehension. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for having the courage to do that and to write so courageously in your book and to use yourself in such an open way that it does really just add that really important personal element to the work. It adds the heart to it. So thank you for putting yourself out there like that for the world to benefit. Let me ask Christy's question from New Zealand here now, if that's okay. We'll switch gears. Yeah. Thank you for your openness with us. And everybody definitely chime in too. This question is from Christy, and actually I think she represents some people who maybe are reading the book and are therapists and are newer to ACT. Yeah. What she wants to know is how practitioners who have read the book can start. What do you recommend people do to start putting ACT into practice in their clinical work? And she, it sounds like, has been doing some reading, doing some training. She's heard some bits about this, but she really wanted to hear from you, your perspective about this, about how to take the leap.
You know, we now know something about this, you know, because what seems to matter from an ACT point of view in terms of training is to be able to see and read the processes enough to be able to fit the methods that are in ACT, but not just ACT. They're out there. Some of them will include things people are already really good at doing. I always say, don't think you have to let go of the things that really work for you as a practitioner. I bet you if you turn it, if it's evidence-based and it works, you turn it, it'll sit inside the psychological flexibility model. Because that model is not a model of ACT, it's a model of human functioning. And, you know, we did spend a lot of time working out these basic processes and so forth. And I always tell that story of the 16-year gap from the earliest randomized trials to the first, you know, really explications of the model, you know. And so you got a muting problem, somebody.
Hey.
So I think what I would suggest in terms of training would be to start with yourself, because this applies to you too. And if you don't have an ACT therapist or something, or you haven't done an experiential ACT workshop that's really oriented towards your own stuff, and there's a number of them out there, then take it out of your mind, the happiness trap, one of the major kind of self-help ones, and walk through it in a way that applies to your own stuff. And the next step, I'd say, would be to watch some people doing some of the work. There's lots of free tapes and so forth on the website, you know, ACBS website. Only costs $12 to join if you pay the minimum. There's now really good online courses with really good videos and so forth. I have one, but there's others that have them. And then if you can afford it, if you can't afford that, by the way, if I don't publicly say this, but if you can't afford my course, write me an email. I'll just say that. But
a little insider tip there.
Yes, a little insider tip, because basically I do not allow money to be a barrier. I just won't. But I want honesty, you know. I want that. So anyway, and then there's the books I like are like Learning ACT. I think is a really good one with the videos that are available there, and walking through a focus on processes. And then you're going to have to apply some of these things and get some supervision. It turns out if you can't get supervision from an experienced ACT person, just having a collection of practitioners who care about it enough to be doing the reading and stuff and exploring it themselves and creating a peer supervision group, that does like 70 or 80% of what you'd get from, well, maybe that's unfair to say. It's not 70 or 80% of what you'd get from a Robin Walser or something, but it's a lot. I mean, I've actually seen the tapes of people who only had supervision from peer supervisors who are beginning ACT therapists, and they're great. But because outside the session, people can see things that you can't see inside the session. You get hooked. So try some of these things. I usually say, follow a protocol the first 2 or 3 clients. Don't take it in with you to the session. Read it beforehand, get prepared, go in. I like reading transcripts. There's an article a book called ACT Verbatim, which is based on a transcript that I used to use to teach ACT before there was any books on ACT. And I'd have people follow a protocol, read transcripts, have them say it out loud, actually say both the roles out loud, because you want to be able to hear the note when you listen to your clients and have an idea. And if you do that out loud and you listen to yourself saying it out loud, it'll occur to you in a way that just reading a transcript won't when you're actually in session. And that combination of beginning with some peer supervision or expert supervision, if you can get it, and preparation with yourself and a focus on processes, then will allow you to take the various kind of therapist-oriented books that are out there and trainings that are out there, including the boot camps and all of that, which will be really, really helpful if you can get to them, and continue an ACT journey. I always say I'm not the best ACT therapist. I'm just not. I'm not the best ACT trainer. I'm still learning. And because ACT is an organic growing thing, there's a worldwide community that is chasing what are the smallest set of processes that do the most good. What is the 20% that does the 80%? And the psychological flexibility processes I would nominate as the best evidence-based answer to that question. And so a liberated mind opens the door, but you then have to walk through it. And what I just said will minimum cost would be probably $150 for almost everything I've just talked about. Is it not hugely expensive? And minimum time to get to the point where you really start feeling as though, like, I got my ACT feet, is probably 6 to 12 months. But the community will support you. The ACBS community will support you. We've actually done research on who can read the processes well. It's predicted by how many books did you read, how many workshops did you go to, and do you belong to an ACBS chapter? And you can see why. We're just better in community than we are. That's the kind of monkey we are. So find some people who are interested in supporting you in your journey. And in New Zealand, there's a great ACBS chapter and wonderful clinicians in all the major cities in New Zealand that will support you.
Wonderful. Another great question has just come through that from Valerie Epstein Johnson. Thank you, Valerie, for taking the bold move of asking a really interesting question. So she says, it sounds like she has to be in multiple places, so that's why she's writing in. She says, thank you, Steve, for highlighting the importance of the observing self. In my practice, this is often the most difficult concept for clients to make in a real living connection to their observing self. As an art therapist, I sometimes guide clients in creating images of this deeper, wiser part of themselves, so they have a more grounded place to go when they need this self to diffuse and expand. Yeah. But my language can often get too abstract when trying to just explain the idea. What a great question. Do you have specific language you find works best in helping clients truly know their observing selves? What a great question.
Well, some of the exercises that are pivotal kind of exercises, the experiential ones, are sitting right on top of that, the eyes on exercise, for example, or, something like leaves on the stream, which is a diffusion exercise. Yeah, but who's watching? That's a sense of self of kind of exercise. The contemplative practice work. Contemplative practice and meditation is basically practice in sitting inside the observer self and watching how the mind constantly pulls you off into other senses of self and coming back to that. It's basically training and attentional processes, but also diffusion and acceptance processes, but in the context of witnessing, observing, noticing. And I think this move to look at things like art therapy and so forth is really important. I have a blog that I just wrote. It just went out today, I think, on Psych Today and Medium and some of these other things that are out there on, using these kind of, using your body, for example, or imagery or music or pictures and so forth to touch some of these processes that go beyond words. Because the beginning of that question said, one of the hardest concepts to teach is the conceptualized self. I mean the self as context. Yeah, but the core of that is not a concept at all. It's an experience. And so we don't really want to, and I'm not meaning to be critical here, but this person who wrote the question definitely knows this. We don't want it to be conceptual, and it's right. It's in any moment. It's in any moment, right in the point where that client is struggling and struggling. If they just catch who's noticing, they just caught the whole conscious human being who has that history and has that body and has those memories and has those yearnings and has those thoughts and has that problem solving issue and so forth, of just grounding yourself. Or if in session, that moment when the eyes of you and your client meet, that moment of connection is the context in which, it's a social extension of the context in which all the rest of the flexibility model makes sense. And so go to consciousness, basically, because this is just a word for consciousness, not of something, not for something, but just period, end of story. Awareness as it is, as you experience it to be, not as it's talked about or what you think it means. Or so, we are aware. And so, yes, I like the move of, getting out of your mind and into your art, or music, or body, or movement, or meditation, or experience. I think that's the way in. And then once you get that, once you touch that, okay, then you can use a word. But use it lightly, don't overdo it, because then you turn it back into a concept. But you do need words to help orient you towards experiences. I call it nailing a hook in the wall, because when you've had an experience, you nail it in the wall, you can hang things on it. You can overdo it clinically. You keep going back to it over and over again, you'll diminish the thing. But that experience, if I can say one thing that's also kind of, maybe will come out of left field, but I'm going to do it. I think the work that's going on in psychedelic therapy might open up this territory in a brand new way. Well, not brand new, it's old stuff, but not in the, I'm a child of the 60s, and, I've seen the good and bad of all that, but done in a new way. The evidence on that is so cool. I have an article out in JCBS that links up to the neurobiological effects of psychedelics. What do? They undermine the narrative gatekeepers in the brain that filter out information. I mean, you literally don't know what world you're in when you're inside yourself as a story or as a concept, because you're filtering out anything that doesn't fit that concept. You start seeing the world through the eyes of your pretense, your pride, your fear, your story, your comparison, how great and grand you are, how sad and pathetic you are. So that might be another one and ACT is being used worldwide as a structure in which to do responsible forms of psychedelic therapy, because it fits the evidence on processes of change so powerfully. So that may be another tool kit, a tool in our kit, as people get more comfortable about actually using that clinically. And hopefully let's not do the 60s again, please. Yeah, too many people didn't make it out alive.
Oh, we have another question. Czech Republic, amazing. So, hello, Steve. I'm a student from the Czech Republic, and I'd like to ask, what are your recommendations on working with someone or preparing them for ACT work who is finding themselves in the hell of mental health disorder like you once did, but maybe with trauma history and or dissociation? For example, someone for whom the central pillar of ACT, as you mentioned, mindfulness, is not easily available because of being shut down or having a too overloaded nervous system. Wow, great.
Sure.
Thank you, Jacob.
Well, there are some people for whom the continuity, undermining the continuity of consciousness was an avoidance move. It's almost universally people who are exposed at a very early age to extreme forms of trauma and aversive events, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, etc. When you're too young to defend yourself at all and control your environment at all, and you stumble into the solution of dissociation or even, multiple personality, etc., where you kind of, you attack the continuity of consciousness itself as a form of self-soothing. And so you see this in access to kinds of things, etc., depending how extreme. For those, what you have to do is use the other flexibility processes to create a context that makes it safe to access it. Now it's already there, the underlying neurobiological evidence and implicit cognition evidence is when people really dissociate or when they do this kind of fragmented self thing. No, you're one or an integrated organism, and you're aware of or connected to these parts that you're suppressing, denying, splitting, dissociating around. And to really bring that into a place where that's a resource and not a fear or not a huge mountain to climb, you're going to have diffusion skills, acceptance skills, attentional flexibility skills. You have to begin to open yourself up to values. That's usually a little later on. You don't lead with those either for the same reason. People who've done this very often inside their journey have not only attacked the continuity of consciousness, they've also not been able to integrate their behavior into a values-based journey. And, there's a reason why Marshall Linehan doesn't put values in as stage 1 in DBT. It's a really hard, you better be good if you're going to do it, because people's heads practically spins on the top of a pivot. If you have been spending a lot of time doing forms of avoidance that are extreme, that undermine that. And then as you do that, then walk back in, step in, one step at a time, into the continuity of consciousness. And I would do it in smaller ways. Don't give people long eyes closed exercises. Don't give them, long contemplative practice kind of things. You're supposed to do smaller, lighter, come out, toe in the water, come out, foot in the water, come out, leg in the water, come out. And you're essentially trying to build the safety of the continuity of consciousness and its social extension and connection with others as a way to, then create a ground of being that will allow the other flexibility processes to be worked together, to be used. So I think, essentially it's kind of an exposure exercise to consciousness itself in this deeper sense of the continuity of the I hear nowness of awareness.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we're aware that it's been about an hour, and does anyone have one last burning question? We can call it the end of the hour, unless, I don't know if Steve, if you have to run, but unless
no, I can go a little longer if anybody has a concluding question or two.
Okay.
I'm happy to do it.
Anybody? This is your chance. Take advantage. You can feel free to either just unmute and ask or ask on the chat, either way.
I'll jump in.
Awesome.
Yay!
Thanks. Hi.
Hi. Steve, I just liked pivot, the word pivot that you use throughout the book. And I'm just curious about your journey with the language you wanted to use for that action.
Yeah.
And how you came to that.
Cool. You know, the original title of the book, as it developed, when it first started, you know, it had different kind of titles. Open was a working title. There were others. But as the yearning business began to really catch hold, now we're about 4.5 years ago, and then up to about 4 years ago, as it really became more central, and I realized that inside our struggles, you know, inside what we call psychopathology, is an energy that is really powerful and wonderful. And part of the message that I have just for folks who are suffering is that you've earned something by that suffering, because right inside it is really important information. If I say it this way, won't quite get to it, but in a deeper sense, what do you want? And what is this about? What is this for? And then inside it, in the flexibility model, we've always had this thing where the inflexibility hexagon and the flexibility hexagon are really just two versions of the same thing. But it turns out there's actual glue, I think, that fits them together. I mean, I don't want to compartmentalize it. All these flexibility processes are 6 that are 3 that are 1. And these yearnings, too, are kind of 6 that are 3 that are 1. And there's other ones that you could add. But when I realized that what I was saying was that there was a motivational operation, there was an energy, the way behavior analysts would say it, but there's an energy or a drive inside psychopathology that we are essentially appealing to from an ACT perspective inside the positive flexibility processes we train. Well, then the metaphor of a pivot showed up. I think John Cloud first said the word, and it was going to be the title of the book, but a couple other books came out with that title, actually. And we decided not to. Plus, the political things were happening, and people are constantly talking about, you know, is Trump going to pivot towards something different or something? And I said, oh, God, you know. To even put it as a subtitle was a big issue because of the political use of it. But to me, this summarizes the idea that you can swing your pathology around very much the way you'd swing a dance partner around. And just like, as you know, by dancing, is that if somebody's moving, it's easier to dance with them. If they're just standing there like a stick, pretty darn hard to dance with them, especially if you want to swing people around. You want to be able to be moving. Then we could put that energy in different directions, working together. The same thing with our clients. We're in a dance with our clients. Could we take the energy that's inside their suffering, and not just in a general way of, you know, boy, your life's really messed up, are you ready for something different? But in a more specific way. I gave an example with the original question about belonging. When we come in with all this chatter about how other people aren't treating you fairly or they need to be different or whatever, and you realize what's in that conversation is a yearning for belonging and attachment and connection. Can I take all this mindy stuff and swing it, or the energy that's inside it, around, and open people up to the joyful interconnection that can come from the connection in consciousness with others, and that acceptance now extends to compassion, and diffusion extends to non-judgment and deep listening, and, you know, flexible attention extends to being really interested in what is of interest to others, etc. Values become social. we can work together, you know, what we're trying to do with building it out, some of the stuff out into pro-social and so forth. We can actually find social ways of working together and taking the energy that's inside what we're doing in ACT and put it to climate change or to dealing with immigration or to, you know, showing more kindness in the world and so on. So the pivot metaphor vitalized the core, what's really new for therapists in A Liberated Mind, which is the game that we've been playing right along, I realized is the reason why ACT is based on the psychological model of health is that we're going to take these struggles and we're going to honor what's inside them and channel it towards what makes a difference. And the pivot metaphor really, really works well for that. And it kind of takes clients off the hook in a way. You don't have to start somewhere else. You can start inside your suffering, because there's inside that big pile of pony poop is a precious jewel if we can reach down and grab it. And it'll help you. It won't abandon you. If you open up to it, when you see you're yearning for belonging and you admit that to yourself, man, you just have like plugged your, plugged into the power in your house or something. Your suffering has a direction now and a purpose and a focus. So, and it's true of all the flexibility processes. So, yeah, thanks for asking it. I think is a very useful, gentle concept. Gentle in the sense of it's not real mindy or anything. It just reminds us in therapy about what we're trying to do. Find the energy that's there right inside this moment and channel it towards what brings progress, meaning, purpose, growth into the human life that we're working with.
Thanks, John, for that great question. So we're going to take this opportunity to wrap up, but I just was having this experience, Steve, of listening to you of, it was very similar to actually the book, of feeling inspired, kind of like that we're having this conversation. And so I'm really grateful for the book, because, you know, when you're long gone, so many people are going to be having this same inspiring conversation. And it makes me kind of tear up thinking about that. And I just want to say thanks. You know, these are beautiful conversations and I feel really inspired. And I think many, many of us do.
Well, that's maybe a good way to end, especially since we're talking about the end when you're long gone. But I tell you what, you know, there's a reason why the funeral, headstone kind of thing is some of these ACT classic kinds of things, you know, writing your eulogy and all that kind of stuff. We've diminished it some because there's a darkness to it that scares people. So, you know, we'll have a retirement party instead of, but, you know, I just had I'll just a couple minutes. A precious, precious person in our life, my son's nanny and my first secretary at Context Press and my first grant secretary, Ingi Skeens, died this year, and at about age 80. And we just had a celebration of her life 2 days ago. And about 25 of us got together and told stories and wept and showed pictures. And, you know, and my son was there, and he's never seen anything like that. It's his first death that's really close. And I could tell on the ride home that we just did something that was really, really important. You know, that we're not going to live forever. We're not going to be remembered forever. That's not what's going to happen. None of us are immortal, even in memory. And that sense of standing on the shoulders of giants that I mentioned earlier, you know, these intellectual heroes, not even people like Tim Beck and so forth, who, yeah, I have some disagreements with, but my goodness, and all the work we've done. You know, the way I usually say it is, if, you know, your children's children could be helped in some way by what you do over this next day, even though they didn't know that it had anything to do with you, ever, would that be worthy of your attention? And in fact, we're doing that right now with our clients, because you know the data on if you move a single person, it moves the people who are friends or in a relationship with them, people they know, the people that they know, and the people that they know. So your one client may have 10,000 people sitting there in the room with them. You're treating 10,000 people, essentially. And so I said the reason I decided to write this book was that I figured it's now or never, because life is finite. And that's part of what makes it precious. And so instead of grabbing on and say, how am I going to be remembered or something? What if we grabbed on to, how can I be useful? How can I be helpful? How can I be kind? How can I put values into my life moments this day and empower others around me to do the same, you know, my family, coworkers, etc., to create a context in which we get to talk about what's hard and to focus on what's important, and to do that at, you know, at work and at home and in our schools and churches and community groups and culture and so on. That's the journey we've been on as human beings. And psychotherapy is not to like fix the mentally ill, to put them back into a war zone. Psychotherapy is trying to dig down to the processes that liberate human beings and to put it into human lives, our own, and those are the people that we work with, and those are the people that we serve. So if this little thing is recorded and I am dead and gone and people are reading that book, let me just say from the grave, what's of importance is for us to live with integrity inside this journey as therapists and as behavioral health specialists and as people who study these processes, to try to bring something new into the world of evidence-based practice processes that are more adequate to the challenge of the human condition, that never minimize, that never say, well, that's just this, that simplify, that make it easier, but that don't oversimplify and reduce. And together in community, we've made progress on that. We're going to make more progress on that. And as I said in A Liberated Mind, if you had to pick one time to be born and you could only choose the time but not the place, right now would be the best choice, because on almost every metric we're doing better, except for behavioral health and mental health. And so time's up. It's time for us to get in the game and to deliver it. And we need to rise to these social challenges and psychological challenges of a world that's so integrated that if something horrible happens over the next 10 minutes, you can see it on your iPhone. You know, they're so connected. And our young people are staggering under the weight of this kind of paradox of prosperity on the one hand and ever-rising challenges, and then the culture being unwise and telling them that, you know, with the right car, the right beer, the right medication or whatever, it's okay to be human. And that's just not going to work. And so let's work together. Let's do something that's worthy of our time on the planet. And thanks for the 1 hour and 15 minutes that you gave me.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was just what we all needed. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us, Steve. Thank you. Huge thank you for the book and for joining us. And yes, we appreciate everyone being here.
Go out there, everybody.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye.